I also find this whole follow your passion argument or follow your passion advice somewhat problematic. Prototype the hell out of your life.
So today we have with us Archana Rao ma'am, who is an alumnus of the 2008 batch of AIT. She was from the ENTC branch and was the magazine board secretary as well. She worked for a lot of fashion shows in AFMC as well. Later on, she went to work for HSBC and followed by Teach for India, after which she did an MBA from Hardin University of Virginia, post which she worked with the Boston Consulting Group and Ernst & Young. So, ma'am currently is the Director of Strategy and Operations at an EdTech firm.
Ma'am passionately writes about B School in her blogs. Apart from that, she also has started this Life of a Global Desi, which is a podcast which has more than 4,000 listeners per month. Apart from that, she also doodles and makes cartoons and puts this on his website, like posted. Apart from that, he also loves yoga, meditation, and traveling.
Back in 2004, 2008, it was a very different time, right? Because this was the age before internet, so to speak. Because I remember Orkut was like just getting popular, which I don't even think you guys know what Orkut is. It was this social messaging platform before Facebook. Yes, you've only heard of
very
it.
small. We have heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that goes to say how far back this was. And Facebook was just about gaining some steam in 2008, right? So this was before like the age of smartphones, and there wasn't really much else to do on campus other than just hang out with other students, right? So I think couple that with the fact that AID was in the middle of nowhere, really, was in the middle of Diggy Hills, slightly far away from the city. In general, it just seemed like there was so much time on campus. So it was a very close-knit community. And I felt like that was a very formative age as well, because between the ages of 16 to 22, it's a very impressionable age, right? So it just goes to show how critical the peer group that you have is at AIT. And I think for the most part, for me, it really shaped my worldview in a lot of ways. Your ideas about life, career, relationships to some extent. It's all really shaped by the people that you surround yourself with in college. And AIT was also quite a competitive place if you think about it, right? Students came in with a lot of different interests. There were people both in like the seniors and the juniors, all of those batches that you could draw a lot of inspiration from as well. So I think in a lot of ways, those 4 years did make up a lot of my personality today. And, so much so that some of my closest friends today are also from AIT. And the person I ended up choosing as a life partner is also an AITian. So it's, it was a really interesting place in that sense, because as young adults, when you're in that age group, you're also kind of bubbling with so much energy, right? So you can kind of put it in so many different ways. Some students chose to be really excelling in academics, so they'd just like study all the time, or some students would go all out during extracurriculars, and I was definitely one of them. I used to participate in like everything that was on campus. Obviously was the
Okay,
secretary
ma'am.
of the magazine board.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you just tell us the moment when you met your husband at AIT? I mean, what was it like when you were at AIT?
Oh
Did you
wow,
decided?
you guys are looking for the the meet cute story on this. There's really, I'm telling you, there was really nothing going on when we were at AIT. We both were in the same years. So he was in the IT batch, and I was in IT and then moved to electronics and telecom. But honestly, nothing was going on during those 4 years. It was much later when we started working that we kind of hit it off. And yeah, I mean, that was that. And since then, I want to say this is 2011, where we were dating, and then we both came to the US for business school together, and we did the 2 years of business school together, and then decided to get married about 5 years back. So yeah, that was that.
That's sweet. Sorry, yes, ma'am, there was something else you were saying?
Yeah, I was just mentioning that, So honestly at AIT, to your question about how it shaped, your choices and what you did for a career and things like that. I think, like I said, a lot of students kind of found their different, you know, like avenues for kind of releasing that creative energy. So for me, it was really about magazine board. I used to participate in a lot of the cultural events. We obviously did Akriti, and I also took a pretty keen interest in starting a lot of like the fashion show choreography. We took part in a lot of events outside of college with AFMC fashion shows and things like that. So that took up a lot of my time as well. But I think in retrospect, it was just such a great way to meet so many people on campus, right? Because once you start taking part in these competitions and um, just doing something or organizing something, you just end up meeting people not just in your batch but also people who are seniors or juniors, and just across. And you just get to learn so much about um, other kids on campus. And I think that just really helped me form so many deep relationships with just people across the batches. And I think in general, in a lot of ways, I think that's been a big part of my personality, and just how enthusiastic I am about meeting new people or making new friends, or it's just held me in good stead since then, right? Ever forward in life, that I just find it's really easy to kind of be personable and just meet new people and make new friends. And I think those 4 years at AIT were very, very pivotal in building this facet of my personality. So yeah, I look back with a lot of fondness when I think of those 4 years at AIT, and in a lot of ways, very pivotal in making me who I am today.
Right, ma'am. So, if
Okay, so
I'd like to rephrase it, so from the skill point of view, if we see, so it helped you build on soft skills, rather than the hard skills that are required in the industry. Like, could you say that?
So that's a very interesting way to kind of reframe it, because when I look back at those 4 years, I would say academics was a very minuscule part of what I remember, honestly, because of course we were in class, we were taking exams and all of that. But I think for me, the 4 years were really more about exploring what my interests were, rather than, of course, I wouldn't say excelled in academics, but got the required marks that were required and all of that, and did kind of study in the last 4 weeks before exams and still ended up getting a good grade. But I think engineering itself, for a lot of us, I noticed, was just one of these things that people just did, right? I mean, back then it was like you either be an engineer or you be a doctor, right? And I think it's very, very similar for a lot of students across India. And so for me, the question really was, all right, so I am doing engineering, but am I really passionate about it? Versus let me invest these 4 years in really learning about other aspects of my personality or skill set that I might be interested in, which is where I picked up, on top of the quantitative skills that we all already were good at, just these more organizational sort of skills, like being able to put things together, being entrepreneurial, being innovative, coming up with new ideas. Coming up with new ideas is one thing, but then how do you go ahead and execute it flawlessly, right? And that takes a lot of consensus building, that takes a lot of initiative and drive, and these kind of skills are what I think I really picked up in AIT unknowingly. It's not like I set out to um, do this and be like, okay, I'm going to be entrepreneurial. Not really. I just followed my interests. I was interested in organizing fashion shows, so I went ahead and did that. We needed to raise money for those fashion shows. We needed to get sponsors. So I went ahead and spoke to a couple of design houses in Pune to literally fund our entire fashion show, right? I didn't realize that I was doing fundraising, but that's what it was. And even in college, right, even organizing those massive cultural festivals with like almost 1,000 students on campus, it takes a lot of effort, planning, and flawless executions. It's like operational skills. That's literally what you learn. So knowingly or unknowingly, I would say more unknowingly, I kind of built up on all these business skills and management skills that are so pivotal in today's business world, right? And so I think for me, I would say on top of the quantitative skill set, it was just so interesting to kind of mix that up with these softer qualitative skill sets that are, in a lot of ways, in my opinion, more valuable in today's life than just pure number crunching or pure coding, right? And I see that more and more, which is one of the reasons AITians do tend to excel in any field that they're in.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Ma'am, given these experiences at AIT and having explored so much, uh, when you were just graduating from AIT, what were you thinking? Just about the time of placements and what are you gonna do after that? And can you just throw some light on the life just after AIT and your experience at HSBC as well?
Yeah, sure. So honestly, life post AIT in a lot of ways was quite revealing, because when you're in AIT, when you're in the army sort of bubble and the army world, you're pretty much living in these army cantonments, going to army schools, interacting with a certain type of person. Because think about it, even at AIT, all students were from the army background. Everyone had a similar background to you. They knew exactly what your life was about and they could totally relate to it, right? It's only when you step out of the AIT bubble and the army bubble in general is when you realize how sheltered you've been from the civilian world, so to say, right? And you just learn to realize how diverse and broad the world outside is. Like, despite the fact that we've traveled so much in India, we've only traveled in certain types of ways or in certain types of places. And we don't generally interact with like the broader socioeconomic strata of people, right? So for me, I would say post AIT was when I got that real foray into the real world, so to say, right? And back then, in the year 2007, 2008, also remember this was the time of the financial crisis. So it was pretty hard from a economic standpoint. The job market wasn't doing so great, but despite that, almost 100 students from my batch got placed at Infosys. And almost everyone kind of started with some sort of job, or didn't, even if they didn't graduate with a job, they got one eventually. For me, I decided against sitting for Infosys for some reason. I don't know what it was. It was just this gut feeling that I did not want to be part of like that coding world or like the computer science or IT world of sorts. And I was really looking for some more global brands, so to say. And so I was lucky to get a placement with IBM and HSBC. And I was one of 4 or 5 people, I think, who got through HSBC in our batch. And honestly, at 22, I did not have a clue as to what I wanted for a career, right? I mean, and I would say, I would like to believe that it's better at 33, but only very slightly, right? It's not very different. So it was pretty much a decision, this whole decision of, okay, let's do engineering, let's follow the crowd, let's get a corporate job, and then kind of do an MBA. So a lot of that was happening, even not just with me, even with a lot of students, people in my batch and friends in my batch, right? So that happened. That's what happened with HSBC as well, because some students were kind of going on and studying for CAT or giving MBA entrance exams, but for some reason I just felt like I just wanted to work and get some professional experience and skill sets. So that's when HSBC happened. And in retrospect, when I think about it, even the kind of teams that I chose at HSBC were not particularly hardcore coding or IT related, right? I always felt like, okay, if I do choose that, I could probably psych myself to be good at it, but I probably wouldn't enjoy it, because by this time I'd started kind of listening to what interested me versus what everyone around me was doing and what I should be doing, so to say. So that happened. And at HSBC, I decided to work with the internal consulting arm of HSBC, which is basically, where it works directly with the businesses across the globe and helps them kind of solve their financial business problems. So that was really interesting, at least occupied me kind of productively during the work hours, right? But here again, right, there was no stopping me from kind of participating and winning some of like the HSBC fashion show maybe, or organizing CSR activities or town halls. And pretty much in a couple of years, for some reason, I organized this volunteering program with this local NGO. And so every dollar that the employees raised, HSBC would match another dollar for that NGO, right? And this was probably the first time in my life I saw the absolute, like, direct and tangible impact of the efforts that I put in and what the results were. So that really excited me, right? Versus everything else that I was doing in HSBC just felt like, okay, I'm making this Excel sheet and I'm crunching these numbers away. I built this model, but I really don't know how that's impacting the end person or the end user, right? Um, so for me, this was really helpful. And I think it also excited me because the power of like the public and the private partnerships. So if you think about it, the corporate world and then the local, like the NGO landscape, I just, it was just so evident to see that corporates could have such a positive impact from a top-down perspective in the social landscape, right? More than just kind of making money for their shareholders or increasing like earnings per share. So I think this was also around the time I started kind of toying around with social impact and impact investing and things like that, and just the keen interest in education kind of took over. But yeah, HSBC, I would say, largely was also just building those professional skill sets and just exploring again everything that really interested in me, going full force at it, and still a lot of confusion in a lot of ways, I would say.
Is that when you were at HSBC, did you like gravitate towards, Teach for India, and then, or, was it something that you'd already had in mind, but then because of, the circumstances back then, that was, the recession and stuff like that, that you did not really give into the idea?
Yeah, I would say the recession really didn't have anything to do with it because HSBC luckily was a pretty global organization and it was mostly based in APAC regions, so the Asia Pacific regions, which weren't very badly hit by the recession. It was mostly the US companies and the US markets that were badly hit by the 2008 recession, right? Um, so yeah, that wasn't part of it. Like I said, it was mostly just, the fact that I was dabbling in all of these extracurriculars, even at HSBC, reading up a lot, researching a lot. It was during this time um, on social impact, impact investing, just a general idea of, corporate social responsibility, so to say, um, and really just trying to figure out how, from a top-down, business investing perspective, not just that, but also from a bottom-up grassroots level perspective, right? The more I was reading about it, the more interested I got into the subject, and the field really just drew me in for some reason. And I think, like I said, alluded to earlier, this was also really the first time that we were stepping out of that AIT bubble, honestly, for me, or the army bubble. And it became really clear that the socio-economic strata that one comes from or that one is born into largely defines what sort of a trajectory you'll have in life, right? It's only because our parents and family were so driven and invested in setting us up for success that we've had the opportunities in life that we've had, right? Be it going to a good school, be it getting all the jobs that we get or the opportunities that we get. But that's really not the case for everyone, right? So there was a little bit of youthful idealism as well there, right? That drove my decision around Teach for India. And I think this was also around the time when it became very clear to me, coupled with the earlier fact that,
So,
yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, ma'am. Can you just let our listeners know in a brief, like what is Teach for India and
Absolutely.
something about that?
So like I said, Teach for India is a 2-year full-time fellowship program, which is funded by quite a few of the big philanthropic organizations in India, including the Aga Khan Foundation and I think also the Tata Group as well. It's a 2-year full-time program where you get placed in a low-income government school in all over the country, right? So it could be in big cities like Pune, Mumbai, Hyderabad, or even in the rural 2-tier cities in India. And essentially what you do here is you couple your professional or academic background, say you're right out of undergrad or you've had a couple of years of experience, you couple that with really effective teaching and try to bring about a transformational change in one of the classrooms that you're assigned to. So for example, I was assigned to a second grade classroom in a government school in Lakshmi Nagar, which is right next to Yerwada, right? As soon as you cross the bridge. So I was literally there. So I didn't move too far away from AIT during Teach for India. Of course, I moved to Hyderabad for HSBC, but then got back to Pune. And you teach them a subject that you're assigned. So I was teaching English and math, which honestly by far was the most, the most transforming 2 years of my life. And honestly, like I said, for me, this was also around the time when I was thinking about the fact that having access to trusted mentors and guides, right, in your early childhood can really set you up for success, because we all remember those one or two teachers in our school who either instilled a certain love for a subject, or just older mentors who we looked up to and were really inspired by. So that really helps you kind of set those goals and work hard. And I always had this deep desire to be that mentor or guide for someone else in my life, right? And or doing that in some capacity, which is what led me to Teach for India in a lot of ways. And very frankly, I had also spent 2 years at HSBC, and 2 years is around the mark when army kids kind of get restless around, okay, which is the new city that we're going to now, right? So because growing up, every 2 years, your dad would get posted out, and you're kind of itching to, by that time, that whole exploration bug sort of bit me, and I just wanted to move on to a new adventure of sorts, right? So like I said, I applied to Teach for India, got selected. I was one of the very early batches that started it. So it was started in 2009, and I was in the 2011 batch. So again, very nascent NGO, very nascent setup, a lot of experiments, a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in that sense. The entire organization was very young, very new. So that was also very exciting. And of course, a complete switch from HSBC, finance, banking, IT, engineering, right? All of that. But I think such a new challenge in a lot of ways, right? And it really opened up so many skill sets that I didn't know I had, right? First of all, the skill set of patience, the fact that you're teaching 60 second graders. Second graders are 6 years old, right? So this is crazy. And couple that with the fact that a lot of them are from really hard backgrounds, right? A lot of them are from very challenging, difficult backgrounds, very under-resourced sort of infrastructure. And a lot of the students are not at the level that they should be at. So for example, there is a report that's generated every year. So there's this annual report called the Annual Status of Education Report that the Government of India, conducts the study. And it really goes to show just how poor the quality of primary education in India is, right? So 1 in 2 students cannot read a text that is meant for 3 grades below them. So for example, an 8th class student cannot read a text that is meant for a 5th standard student, right? So that's appalling. And math is very similar. Students in the 8th grade who should be doing a simple 3-number division by a 1-digit division are just not able to do it, right? So it was very challenging. So it really gave me the opportunity to be persistent, determined with what goals I'd set for the students, and just even for myself, right? Learning how to even be a teacher, right? I mean, it's very easy to sit and talk about, oh, the teaching system is so bad, or India is all about rote learning, or the education system is so, so appalling in India. But I think it really gave me a chance to kind of work at the grassroots level and see what I can do for myself, right? And I think it really helped me with the quantitative skills that I'd gained at engineering, right? I adopted a lot of innovative methods of being data-driven with how I'm teaching. So for example, I differentiate my class. So say 1/3 of the class was at a certain grade level versus the other third of the class was at a higher grade level. I would differentiate my teaching in such a way so as to suit all of the students, right? Because at the end of the day, you just have to be someone who's inculcating the joy of learning in students, right? Because students are really like sponges. And we all know this, right? We absorb anything that's kind of thrown our way. And if you're that someone in a student's life who's reinforcing the fact that you have high expectations of them, they will follow through, right? They will match up to your standards. And so I think in a lot of ways, these 2 years really solidified the fact that yes, you can put in all the work at the grassroots level and become the best teacher in the world and teach these 60 kids. But I think at the same time, I started realizing that if you really had to scale this effective teaching, you really need systemic changes at the policy level, at the public private intersection level, right? And I think that's when I realized what a gap, even after getting this transformational sort of skill set in these 2 years, that I still had. Because as engineers today, we can appreciate like some of the tools like technology that can bring the much needed scale, and which is already happening in the education space, right? So I think that's what these 2 years did. And yeah, it kind of just threw me out of my comfort zone, the comfort zone of, oh, let me just go to a 9 to 5 job, earn whatever I'm earning, or, just go, get promoted, go on site, all of those things. I just kind of wanted to pull myself out of that. I wouldn't say rat race, but just I wanted to do something different. Honestly, that's what I was driven by. And I found my passion in the intersection of education, technology, and social impact.
Okay, so, ma'am, having so closely worked with so many children and seeing them, teaching them personally for 2 years, ma'am, what I want to know is what motivates children to learn in a better way? And having worked so closely, what one or two things do you think is very important when trying to teach someone, or kids who are underprivileged and they come to schools like these? So can you just tell us a bit about that?
That's a great question, and I can talk about this for hours and hours, but let me try and distill it in a minute. So the thing we need to understand about kids or children is that and we keep hearing this all the time, but for some reason we don't apply it, right? Kids are really unique. Every kid learns so differently. If you think about it, even in our classrooms, right, everything is just so unidirectional. There's a teacher who's kind of giving their lectures. You just have to listen. You can't ask questions in a lot of cases. You can't talk in class. But that might be suited for 10% of the students who learn that way. But you're kind of alienating the rest of the students who are more kinesthetic learners, right? Kids who like doing things with their hands to learn, or oral learners, kids who like listening and learning, or visual learners, kids who like looking at things and learning, or maybe understand better a concept when you visualize it, right? Versus just continuously writing it down, like even math or tables or whatever. So I think that was one of the biggest learnings, that all kids learn differently. So if you want to be an effective teacher, you need to cater to that. You need to be able to build the skill sets to be an effective teacher, to differentiate and customize your teaching to every child in your classroom. Because if you're not doing that, you're failing the students in your classroom, right? Because that's your job as a teacher. The other thing is, the most important thing I learned was, you can't teach a student everything, right? I mean, what you can do as a teacher or a guide is instill the joy of learning, because that's a more sustainable way of teaching. Because if there's a teacher who can inspire me to learn more about, I don't know, for example, astronomy, right? I mean, they don't need to sit and teach me everything there is about astronomy, but if they can instill that spark of astronomy in me, I, as a student, will take it forward and sustainably kind of keep up that inspiration. So as a teacher, what you need to do is keep inspiring students to learn for the joy of learning, not just, okay, if you do these things, you will get 100 on 100 in math, or if you do these questions in English, you can, get so-and-so marks. So a lot of teachers, I think, and again, this is for not to diss on any teachers, but I think because of the time constraints they have, the resources, all of that, teach to the test rather than, learn the concepts or learn for the joy of learning. And I think a lot of this happened at engineering too, right? I don't remember really ever being enthusiastic about all the things that I was learning, but maybe if I had a guide or a professor who got me curious enough to understand what transistors could do in this world or whatever, right, in electronics and telecom, I probably would have picked up that interest. But for some reason I didn't, right? I just it just wasn't part of it. And there were some students who were just so intrinsically motivated in my batch to do that, who now are in, our professors themselves and are really deeply entrenched in academia. But that definitely wasn't the case for me. But I think in these 2 years, those are the things that I learned about how kids learn. And I think the last thing is, despite, like you said, right, kids coming from challenged backgrounds, um, kids just are so enthusiastic about learning. And when you see that a student has understood something, you can see it in their eyes. You can see that, oh, I'm able to add, and or I'm able to multiply. And that's a skill they have for the rest of their life. Like, no one can take it away from them, right? The fact that they can read, no situation can take it away from them, no matter what situation they're born into. And I think that was one of the things that it taught me, was that education is such a social equalizer, right? The fact that you can get a quality education can really set you up for success in life for the rest of your life.
Absolutely, ma'am. So we'd really like to know, when did you decide you want to go for an MBA?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I was definitely not one of those people who was, okay, I'm going to give CAT and go do an MBA right after engineering, because I just didn't feel like it was going to add any value to me as a person. But then more importantly, like, I had done that with engineering already, right? So it was almost like, okay, I don't want to make the same mistake with MBA. I want to do an MBA if I feel like it's the right thing to do, and if it's genuinely going to add value to me as a person, right? So it was around the second year of Teach for India when I almost by chance got involved in this founding team of a nonprofit venture called Mentor Me India. So this is a nonprofit that we started, where you match mentors like you and me, like professionals, students, to girls in really challenging backgrounds, right? Because girls and boys, in fact, we eventually started it for boys as well, but we started off with girls because it's very hard to find role models, inspiring role models at that age in those situations, right? So this was a nonprofit that was actually funded by a Harvard Business School venture, right? And the founder of this nonprofit was also at that time an HBS student. So that was really the first time I realized the level of access and skills that a global business degree could really provide, right? Because here was a student who was 24 maybe, who was at HBS, and she had worked in the social impact consulting sort of realm, and was starting a nonprofit in a totally new emerging economy. And she wasn't even Indian. She was South Korean, right? And so for me, that was like, that immediately revealed the immense skills gap that I had in my profile from a business, from an operational standpoint, or even from like an entrepreneurial standpoint, right? So, and really all of these are the skills you need to really solve a complex problem. You really need that holistic skill set, right? And more importantly, that global credibility and that solid network that you get from an MBA school behind you, right? So this was also the time that I started interning with a couple of edtech organizations, which were building products which teach 21st century skills, more than just math, English, right? Building skills like empathy, building skills like collaboration, and what are really needed in the 21st century workspace. And yeah, so I think all of these experiences really revealed to me that an MBA from a global institute can provide level of credibility, but then also, more importantly, the network of people that you can then collaborate with and work on solving some really complex problems, right? And so for me, that was the time that I realized that, okay, I think if I want to study further, this is the degree that will build a holistic skill set for the kind of things that I want to do further in my career in the education technology space, in the social impact space. And yeah, that's really what drew me to doing that. And I think the fact that it was going to be a global MBA was just 100% clear in my mind, because I think, first of all, like unlike a lot of Indian B schools, the selection criteria at some of these global MBA schools is more holistic, right? It goes just beyond your CAT score or your GMAT score. You need to have considerable work experience. You need to demonstrate that you're a leader in the community, not just someone who's crunching numbers all day long. You need to be someone who has like passions, interests, extracurricular excellence, like in addition to top academics, right? All of those are important, but on top of all of that, you need to be a whole person who goes just beyond your 9 to 5 job, right? So that was what Global for. And then I think the global MBA classroom also is worse, right, in terms of the student group, because it's not just one nationality, right? You have people from all, it's not just about nationality. Like, of course, there's students from all over the world, but also just different work backgrounds. And so, unlike some of the Indian B schools where I felt like at that stage in my career, I wouldn't probably benefit or contribute to a classroom which was 70% engineering students right after engineering with, minimal work experience. A global like MBA classroom really had that level of like diversity. So this was around the time I was thinking about MBA and really started doing the research around where should I do it from, what potentially should I do, what potential university, so on and so forth.
Right. So
So
we'd really like to know, ma'am, how did you, first of all, how was your time at Darden? And secondly, I mean, what was that spike in your application, that thing that got you to, such a great B school?
So I think, a little bit of what I alluded to earlier around just this aspect of just diverse work experience, right? Work background. So for example, uh, comparing my Darden classroom to like the earlier statistics that I gave you, right? Almost like 70 to 80% engineers. The MBA classroom at Darden really had, of course, the traditional backgrounds of engineering, consultants, all of that, investment banking. But then it also had army veterans from who were like platoon leaders in Iraq, right? Or there was a professional chef who were at a Michelin star restaurant in New York for almost 4 years, right? There was a financial news reporter who was working at the Stop channel in Japan. And then there were people like me, right, who had, yes, the quantitative skills of engineering, of working in IT, but then also this leadership, demonstrated leadership capabilities of solving complex problems in society, right? So I think that's one of the reasons I chose Darden as well, because when I started shortlisting some schools, I very soon kind of zoned into Darden, University of Virginia, because A, it was high on social impact, and B, it was 100% case study method based. The only other school which is 100% case study is HBS. And so coming to like the college selection, the second part of your question, it really depends. So yeah, I keep thinking about this, that business school college selections are a lot, the whole application process, the interview process, it's a lot like dating, right? Because it's really, you have to have the cultural fit with a college. You need to have that compatibility with a college, both from a personality standpoint, from your career aspiration standpoint, long-term goals, all of that, and what you contribute to that business school, right? So obviously the top 10 business schools like HBS, Stanford, Booth, Wharton, Columbia, all of these are very selective, but they're all looking for different types of people. They're all looking for different types of students, right? Of course, they all want good grades. They all want top grades, top undergrad branding. Some of them just want, really stellar extracurriculars. Some of them want you to demonstrate startup experience or entrepreneurial experience. But doing your research on all of these colleges will soon kind of tell you that some schools are looking for a certain type of social impact person, or maybe some schools are looking for someone who's been, I don't know, really high IQ, done like the CFA level 3, things like that, more finance oriented. But like Wharton is a lot like that, right? Wharton is super quantitative, very finance heavy, whereas Stanford is very social impact heavy. things like that. So I started doing that research and soon realized that Darden was probably going to be a great fit for me because of the fact that it was a small college town. I didn't want to study in a big city like New York or, Chicago, because I wanted to really, the first time I'd go to the US, I wanted that college town experience and really experience it to the full versus getting distracted by the city of New York or other bigger schools. And even my classroom at Darden, right, had almost everyone from Indian origin was from an either IIT undergrad with top branches in computer science. I think there was one other, a couple of other people from LSR, but most of them were from this engineering IIT sort of background because I think in retrospect, I was one of the only students who had a very interesting mix of both like that highly quantitative skill set with engineering and HSBC, but then also a very like qualitative driven, empathetic driven, 21st century, skills driven leadership experience with TFI. So I think it was just the right mix of IQ and EQ. You see what I'm saying? It was really the latter part, I think, which became more important, which I think is more important. Like the whole EQ part is more important in the current business world, in my opinion, right? So that's how I think Darden happened, because even in my interviews, when I was talking about the range of experiences that I've had or the types of solutions that I've come up with for the complex problems in, say, the community at Teach for India or my classroom, or how did I teach a student to read at a third grade proficiency level when the person didn't even know A, B, C, D, right? I think those kind of skills reveal that I was the kind of student that they thought would be a good fit and could contribute to the classroom at Darden, right? Because remember, this is all 100% case study based method, and class participation is key. The classrooms are very interesting. The way they teach anything is just very different from what we are all used to, right? And so I was seeking that that sort of experience as well, because in a case study based classroom, they don't teach you stuff. Like you just, in the sense, you need to prep for the concepts of the class. For example, if you're doing financial accounting, right, you need to learn assets, liabilities, or owner's equity. The professor is not going to spend any time teaching you all of that. You will need to spend 3 to 4 hours before the classroom, and this is for every classroom, every class, by the way, learning what those things are. And for someone like me with zero business background, it was just really rigorous, but also teaches you a lot. Do all of that learning on my own, read the case, which is a real business case. And the thing that happens, the first minute you enter the classroom, the professor just stands, everyone's seated, the class starts at sharp at 8 a.m. And the professor picks on randomly anyone. So they could say, and it's called cold calling, right? So they would say, Archana, so you're the CEO of this company. What's your decision? What are you going to implement? What's your recommendation? That's how the class starts. And so that just teaches you the level of the rigor that you need to put in the day before in understanding the quantitatives, number crunching behind it. B, being able to succinctly articulate what you're going to be doing in that situation, build consensus among the rest of your classroom. And by the way, there was no right answer. I could say that, all right, based on my experience, this is what I would do, and the numbers prove it. But then some other student would stand up and just completely refute you and say, but you haven't thought about these things. Or a third person would stand up, and by the end of the class, you arrive at a solution that was completely different. And by the way, you're convinced about that solution that, yeah, that is the right way to go forward, given the situation. So I would say that those are the skills that I was looking for. And the case study method just completely blew my mind away. And that's one of the reasons Darden was my top choice. And that's what I picked.
You shouldn't do things specifically, because you want to build a profile for a B school. What is the advice, you'd give to applicants who are currently, pursuing their undergraduation, if they know, probably 4 and 5 years down the line, they want to get into a global B school, a top global B school?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And a lot of students ask me this, should I be doing XYZ? And if I do XYZ, will I get into HBS or Stanford or whatever, right? Or should I do this just because this? I don't think that's a good strategy to adopt in general in life, right? probably shouldn't do something just because you're looking for a step up on, I don't know, in your career or MBA. The thing with an MBA is, especially from a top school in the US, it's really expensive, right? So you need to know very, very clearly what is that MBA going to add to your profile, and how are you gaining what sort of gaps is it filling in your profile, first of all, right? Why MBA is the first question that you need to answer for yourself, right? And I think if you have a convincing enough answer, then I would potentially start working towards figuring out what are the skills you can gain to be someone who will be a positive contributor in that classroom, right? So thinking deeply about why you want to do an MBA. Are you even interested in business? Are you even interested in solving business problems? Are you someone who thinks deeply all the time about, how do I increase profitability for a certain company, or how do I use business to then leverage social impact, or things like that? If that's an interest, then I think that MBA is like that jack of all trades sort of degree that'll help you get somewhere eventually, right? And really open up all sorts of avenues. Otherwise, if you're just doing MBA because everyone else is doing MBA, then I don't think that's a good reason. But to your second question around how should people think about 5 years, people who are just graduating 5 years from now, I think that's something you can do, right? Being able to visualize what you want to do 10 years from now. Say, for example, 10 years from now, you want to be the CEO of a startup tech company in some industry, right? Start off by gaining tech experience, right? If you want to be a startup owner, you probably need to have understanding of all parts of business. Maybe do some sort of pro bono consulting with a startup that's already running, up and running, right? Start shadowing people who are startup owners. Start beyond just your 9 to 5 job to try and attend conferences about entrepreneurship, do some Coursera courses on how to, work in how to build equity, how to do round of VC funding. Because I think what you do is, at the end of the day, something that's already kind of pushing you from inside, right? It's already an inherent interest. Doing it the other way around is probably not going to be sustainable. Going with the end in mind that, okay, I want to do an MBA from this school, so hence I have to do all of these things, and then it just becomes like a chore, right? Whatever you're doing, do it 100%, and trust me, the dots will connect. You see what I'm saying? Like, if you are someone who 10 years from now just is dying to be, a founder of a unicorn company, then work backwards around, okay, so what am I interested in, right? I would say also start off with that. What are some passions? Am I interested more in a certain industry? Do I like oil and gas more? Do I enjoy consumer products? Do I enjoy coding hardcore? Then probably an MBA is not a good fit for you, right? You should probably then do, study further and, in AI or machine learning. And trust me, you will be sometimes more successful than someone who's done an MBA from a top school, right? Some of these engineers at Google earn way more than an HBS grad at Google. So I would say starting off with your passion and what you see yourself doing 10 years from now might help you kind of fill those gaps in between. But then also be flexible, right? Leave some room for surprise. Like, you don't need to overplan the rest of your life on the 5 years and till the MBA, right? Think about being more like letting your interests kind of drive you versus the other way around.
Right. So you do nothing just because you want to build a profile that a certain school would like. You just let things take their course according to your interests.
And trust me, schools are very smart. Schools know if you're doing something just to build a profile, right? For example, you're applying, say, 2 years from now, and 10 days before, or say 2 months before you started, I need to build this community involvement in my profile because I have done nothing in that. And you start volunteering randomly at like a 2 months right before the application. Schools can see through that, right? It kind of screams inconsistency all over, right? So what I'm trying to say with the fact that you need to build on your passions is because it's not going to feel like work. It'll feel like it is something you're already passionate about. So why not just keep doing it? It'll show consistency because you're someone who's taking it to the next level, right? Say, for example, you're someone who loves debating, right? So you start participating in debate competitions at AIT, win some of them, then start going to the national levels, become a better debater. Then there are international debate competitions, right? And you will see these are some of the types of students that all of these schools want. But I wouldn't start doing debating just because 2 years or 5 years down the line, that's where I want to be, right? Because A, you're going to lose steam in between. You'll stop debating completely because A, you hate it. You didn't start it for the right reasons. And then B, schools can see through it, right? So start with what you're really interested in. If say someone like you is really interested in, I really enjoy photography, right? I mean, start clicking pictures, start building a following, get selected in competitions. Like, and that's again, you can't really plan it to the T. These things just happen based on what interests you have. Of course, you need to work at it. You need to be determined. You need to persist at your interests. And then you need to trust that it'll take you to the level at which it all starts making sense, right? Because at the end of the day, an MBA application also needs to be like a story. It needs to be like, okay, why did you do this? Why did you do engineering? Then you went to HSBC, then you randomly started teaching. But there are those connecting dots in between, right? So for me, it was exactly what I mentioned earlier, right? The fact that it was always a lingering interest, and I actually took it to the next level, started really getting deeper into it, building proficiency, trying to figure out how am I going to be the best teacher at both the grassroots level, and then building those business skill sets, and then building that story around what I want to do long term, right? That makes for a more compelling story than just doing a bunch of random things and hoping that it'll look like a story on your application, because it's not going to look like a story,
So,
right? Because
for people like us who are just graduating, just right out of AIT just now, so there are people who are not very clear about what they want to do, and is it okay to take another 3 or 4 years to eventually decide what you want to do? Because if I talk about myself, I'm interested in technical part as well as the management part. I mean, I'm confused between whether to go for an MS or an MBA. So is it like fine to go and explore your interests for another 3 or 4 years and then eventually decide what you really want to do?
100%, right? That's possibly the better way to go around it. So two things I'll say there. One is, I also find this whole follow your passion argument, or follow your passion advice, somewhat problematic, because I feel like someone's told me this. My biggest question also has been, wait, what am I passionate about? What is it that interests me, right? It took me a lot of time and a lot of iterations to be at a place where I finally know, okay, I'm somewhat interested in these kind of things. I don't at all enjoy doing the other side of things. It's a lot of elimination process. It's a lot of process of like elimination, right? And what does that need? That just means you need to experiment a lot, right? We use this method in design thinking and strategy, which is basically to solve a complex problem, right? So for example, you're trying to build a new product, right? You start experimenting with smaller ideas, multiple iterations, and then you build something, test it in the market, get some feedback, come back and tweak it, right? We do this all the time in product management, right? So it's called prototyping. So treat your life's mission and passion exactly like that complex problem, right? Prototype the hell out of your life. Try different things. If you like writing, start a blog. If you want to be a filmmaker, make a short film on your iPhone. If you want to be a chef, start cooking, right? So I think experimenting a lot is the best way to do it. Obviously, the second way to do it is already knowing what you're passionate about and going for it. Some people are very lucky to know that in their life, and obviously it's very envious when you see people around you absolutely enjoying what they do 100% of the time, right? We know people like that who love coding 24/7 and they're so good at it. I sometimes feel like, wow, like you know what you're good at, you know what you love doing. Whereas for me, it hasn't been that easy. It's been a lot of experimenting. It's been a lot of following your gut a little bit, but then also being determined with sticking with it, doing it over and over again to get good at it, to like it, to figure out, okay, this can be a way that I can figure out what, a, a way forward. And also being okay with the fact that not everyone knows what they're passionate about, right? I think we always beat ourselves up about, oh, I need to know exactly what I need to do 10 years from now. Not really. Like, I didn't know I was going to do this 10 years from now. I didn't know I was going to teach 3 years after engineering. I didn't know any of that, right? So it's a lot of also experimenting. And sometimes it may lead nowhere. Sometimes it may lead somewhere. Sometimes it may be a complete waste of time, but at least you've eliminated that, right? You know that, okay, I don't like coding at all, so I'm not even going to try it, right? Versus I love coding, so that's all I'm going to do. Or I really enjoy the business aspect of it, so let me try and intern at a startup and see what that experience is like. Do I enjoy being entrepreneurial? Do I enjoy doing all sorts of things in business versus do I only enjoy sales, right? So it's a lot of internships. I would say the one thing I wish in AIT people had done or had told me was that all 4 years, do internships in your summer, in your winter, just start working for free, like just intern at companies, intern with people. And that's a great way to know what you like doing, what you don't like doing, shadow people that you know who, when they're working. So yeah, I would say that would be my biggest advice in terms of knowing what your passions are and what you like doing as a student.